In this video, we're going to be talking all about the PS5. Now, I know everyone on the internet right now is talking about the PS5, but it's that time of year where the PS5 is going to have a lot of information talked about it, whether we're talking about leaks, whether we're talking about rumors, whether we're talking about confirmed stuff. For the PS5, the PS5 is hot right now, and we do know when the PS5 is most likely coming. Most likely it's coming holiday 2020. I don't see why not. It could come 2021, but at least by 2021 we will all be playing PS5s, or PS5s will be out in the wild. And there's been some new information right now actually confirmed from Sony about what the some of the specs are going to be when it comes to the PS5, and they did also kind of confirm that it's not coming in 2019 at all, and I'm not too surprised it's not coming in 2019 at all. I know some people may have thought it's coming holiday 2019, but that would be wrong. Why would it come holiday 2019? I think that's just too early. 2020 for sure. We are going to most likely be getting this. I could be eating my words right now, but 2020 looks like it's going to be the sweet spot, and most likely it's coming holiday 2020. So get your wallets ready and get your minds ready for the upcoming PS5. Now, we did already get the specs already talked about when it comes to the PS5. The official Sony, someone at Sony pretty much confirmed this, what the specs are going to be. Now, when we talk about the PS5, a lot of these specs are probably going to be the same in the next upcoming Xbox. That's usually how it works when it comes to consoles. Consoles aren't too different when it comes to power. Sure, one may be slightly more powerful. Like for instance, when we talk about this generation of console at the beginning, the PS4 was more powerful than the Xbox One, but not by leaps and bounds. We're only talking very small. It wouldn't even be worth your time to pick up a PS4 over the original base Xbox One just to get more power, because it's not even that big a deal. If you're doing that, you're pretty much wasting your time, because it was not that much better, and it really did not make a difference in the long run. Now, what type of CPU are we talking about when it comes to the next Xbox? Apparently from Sony itself, they are going to be using the AMD Ryzen chip. I think Ryzen Gen 3 specifically. I think it's based off a Navi architecture, and that's absolutely pretty good, because that means it'll be better off, and it should be better off with heat consumption. Overall, this chip should be a better chip. What can I really say about the chip? I'm not too knowledgeable when it comes to CPUs and things like that, when it comes to speeds and all that jazz. I know some stuff about this, but I'm not the go-to person when we talk about specs like that, but it's still pretty nice. I think that chip is very capable, and that chip is going to be a very good chip. It's definitely going to be better than what we have now by a landslide. I think the problem with this generation specifically, they came out too underpowered, and that's why they realized they needed to do a PS4 Pro revision and an Xbox One X revision, because these consoles were coming out way too underpowered. Hopefully this time, when the next generation actually comes out, these consoles won't be too underpowered, and we'll actually be talking about something that can actually last for quite some time. Because it's actually funny, if you go back to the beginning of this generation, these consoles couldn't even do native 1080p in a lot of different cases. I still remember Battlefield 4. Battlefield 4 was definitely one of those games that only played at 900p, and then we have a lot of games coming out on PS4 and Xbox One that couldn't even hit 60 frames per second all the time. So you can see that was a massive blow when you take in consideration PC gamers have had the luxury of playing 1080p 60 frames per second for quite some time prior to, let's say, PS4 and the Xbox One coming out on the market. So that was pretty much a big joke there when it comes to this current generation, especially the beginning of this current generation. So that CPU should be good, and those CPUs, I can tell you, at least from a gaming aspect, are monsters. A lot of people love the Ryzen chips from AMD, and that's probably the way to go in this case. So it's going to be a kick-ass chip, and it should be well equipped to handle almost any game, and we should be seeing, I would assume, 4K 60 frames per second on the next generation consoles. Will we be getting every game in 4K, native 4K 60 frames per second? It's going to be hard to tell, and I'm assuming there'll be some games that just still, for some whatever reason, won't handle 4K 60 frames per second. I don't want to eat my words here, but I'm assuming there'll be some kind of monster powerhouse that you'll see a couple games that won't hit native 4K 60 frames per second, they'll have to do some weird witchery where you'll have to trade off on the graphics to get more frames per second, or you'll get higher, you'll get better graphics at the cost of performance in terms of the frames per second on some games. Actually, I do hope for some reason next generation, when we're talking about next generation, I do hope Sony and Microsoft and these developers actually allow us to give these different quality options in the settings. You're seeing that now with the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, and you're even seeing it with some Nintendo Switch games, because they do realize they want to give consumers options. And if every game can't play at 4K 60, you should let people choose between graphics or frames per second, because I know some people really love frames per second and some people love graphics over frames per second. I know people out there, I know this sounds silly, but there's literally people out there that want the best looking game even if it's only 30 frames per second. They'll get away with something as low as like even 25 frames per second as long as the game could actually play at like 4K. I know that sounds super silly to even say something like that, but there are those people. So if more games on the market next generation come out that actually have a toggle switch, that would absolutely be brilliant. And you can even dumb it down for people who don't really necessarily understand this type of concept, because I know a lot of people play these consoles for one reason. They don't want to think about changing all these settings, which normal PC users are accustomed to, changing all the settings when it comes to a game. And if you don't want to do that, do something dumbed down, like I said, performance mode and graphics mode and things like that. Do something like that to make it a little streamlined. Honestly, should we even be talking about things like this? No, because if they do everything right, you shouldn't have to choose between performance and graphics mode. You should be able to get 4K and 60 frames per second on every single video game. That should be the future of this. Now, the biggest thing we already know, most likely, at least according from Sony, is the fact that we are, for the first time in any console's history, we are going to be getting SSD true support on these consoles. So apparently when these consoles comes out, we are going to be getting SSDs, and that's absolutely fantastic. That'll increase the load times of the games, and overall the operating system will be super fast and everything like that. It should be faster than what we have now, even though the PS4 is a super fast system overall and a lot of games load okay. We should be talking about way faster load times. I actually know that Sony recently did a test on the last a Spider-Man game we got last year, the one that was exclusive to the PS5, and apparently when you fast travel in that game, the fast travel I think is 15 seconds, but then they said with the new SSD technology that they're going to be putting in the PS5, it should cut down the fast travel time from 15 seconds down to 0.8 seconds, and that's not even a full second for that game to actually fast travel. So that's got to be absolutely nuts that load times and fast travel times are becoming a thing of the past. I don't know how much games are going to utilize this SSD, how loading times are going to be with certain games. Will we get 0 to no loading times when it comes to next generation? I'm assuming, I want to say no. We're still not going to be at that state, in my opinion, where we're going to have 0 loading screens. I think there's still going to be some loading screens here or there, but if they can cut them down to like a second or even like 0.8 seconds in fast traveling in some cases, that's got to be mind-blowing, and that's one thing I look forward to in the next generation of consoles, not just specifically the games or the graphics of the games. I'm more interested in those loading times, because loading times are always a pain in the ass, especially when you're trying to play a game. You want to sit down and play, and you want as little much loading times, and there's games out there right now, even on the PS4, that have really bad load times. Even on the Xbox One X, there's games that really do have really bad loading times. So to cut down loading times would absolutely be nuts. So it's nice that they are going to be putting an SSD. Apparently from Sony, they are going to be putting a 2 terabyte SSD into the next PlayStation. Is that true? Honestly, it's hard to say if that's going to be true or not. If they do that, they may be eating some of the cost of the upcoming PS5, because let's face it, a 2 terabyte SSD would be pretty expensive because SSDs still today are very expensive. We're not talking chump change like a hard drive. Hard drives are pretty much inexpensive, and anybody could buy pretty much like a 1, 2, even 4 terabyte hard drive and feel comfortable. But buying big SSDs can get very expensive. Talking about the SSD really quickly of the upcoming PS5, apparently it's going to be faster than any modern day SSD in your computer. So if you have a modern day SSD, this should be faster. I don't know if we're talking about PCI SSD. I think we're just talking about standard SSD when it comes to the next PS5. I don't think we're talking about PCI storage, because PCI storage is going to be faster than SSDs, but PCI storage, if they're trying to get 1 or 2 terabyte, I think that would even be even more impractical, because then we're talking a lot of money wasted just on the performance. So I think we're talking about a traditional SSD, but apparently it's going to be faster than any modern day SSD that's currently out on the market. So that's absolutely got to be fantastic. And some of you guys may be saying, well, doesn't the PS5 allow you to change your hard drive to an SSD? That is actually true. You can actually remove your hard drive from the PS4 and put in an SSD, but here's the catch with that. When you put in an SSD into your PS4, unfortunately the PS4's actual hardware is bottlenecking your SSD, so in most cases don't even waste your time putting an SSD into your PS4. I guess the only one reason you may want to put an SSD into your PS4 in the first place is to save wear and tear on your hard drive, because let's face it, SSDs last longer in the long run than hard drives spinning up, because there's no mechanical parts in an SSD. So common sense, it should say that an SSD will last longer since there's no moving parts, and parts don't have to move, so they will last longer. But in terms of performance, the processors of any of the current PS4s or the Xbox Ones are just really underpowered, which don't even utilize the full effect of SSDs, and in most games you're getting very minimal performance upgrades when we're talking about loading speeds of the actual game. So don't do that. So it'll be nice finally that these consoles look like they'll be equipped to handle SSDs, and this is the first generation we should be getting true SSD support, and it should be a main staple on these consoles, and that's got to be exciting news, because we've been with hard drives so many generations now. I think 2 generations, talking about last gen and then this gen, and I think now SSD's been on the market so long, it's just time for us to get SSDs on this. One of the biggest things they have confirmed with the upcoming PS5 as well is the fact that the upcoming PS5, according to Sony, is going to actually utilize ray tracing. Now, ray tracing is already actually a thing when we're talking about modern GPUs. So if you have, I think, the 2000 series from a lot of these different companies, ray tracing is actually a thing. To summarize ray tracing up really quickly, ray tracing is pretty much how certain objects reflect off of certain objects. So like, for instance, if you're looking at a puddle of water, you can see certain reflections in it, and on certain buildings you can see certain reflections on it. And I do know companies who are making these latest GPUs always make a big deal about ray tracing. I think ray tracing is cool. Pretty much to summarize this up really quickly, what ray tracing is, it just pretty much makes the visuals of the game look outstanding. So overall, games will look outstanding and look better than they did before, even with the current gen hardware. And even if we have games like the Xbox One X, a lot of these games don't use ray tracing. So to have full ray tracing support and more developers using ray tracing, it will make games look much more prettier. So that's absolutely fantastic for the customers, and I'm actually excited to see that in action and see more developers take that in action. Apparently from Sony as well, they're not just going to be focusing on the graphical performance of the games and things like that. You know how it is when these consoles always come out, they primarily focus on the graphics and the fidelity of these games. That's pretty much what people are interested in. But apparently they're really going to focus on the sound aspect of games. And apparently, especially for people who use surround sound, apparently the engines in the next upcoming PS5 is supposed to have better sounds in the game. And especially if you play games like modern day shooters, you can hear people's footsteps better, you can hear gun sounds, you can hear everything much more clearer, especially if you're using surround sound. Apparently, if you're not using surround sound, you won't be able to take full advantage of what the PS5 has to offer. So basically, people who use surround sound will have an advantage over people who don't use surround sound. I just think that's very interesting as well. And then one thing Sony did kind of talk about already when it comes to the PS5, they did say there's going to be some kind of 8K support on the actual box. Now, what does that actually mean? Does that mean the games are going to be playing in full native 8K? Does that mean that applications like YouTube, Netflix, and things like that will be able to support 8K? It's really hard to say, but I'm almost 99% sure that the PS5 is not going to be playing games in 8K. So if you thought the PS5 was going to be playing games in native 8K, you would definitely be wrong. I can guarantee you my bottom dollar, don't expect full 8K support out of that. Taking into consideration this console, there's no way, even if they charge $600 for this console, which they're most likely not going to charge $600 for this console, is the fact that modern day CPUs as of right now, even if you buy the most expensive one, you're not getting 8K support nowhere near 8K, because these these GPUs on the market can't even handle 8K. So you think a device that's going to come out that's going to be $400 or $500 is going to support 8K gaming? No. I think what Sony means, they can mean two things from Sony, because they really didn't make this clear. I think a lot of apps will support 8K, because I'm thinking Sony's like, well, this console's going to be out for quite some time, so let's put 8K in here in the first place so people can watch things like YouTube in 8K and watch some of these streaming services in 8K, because 8K TVs, you could be able to buy them by then, and maybe somebody has an 8K display. Who really knows what the circumstances is when it comes to technology, and this thing's going to be on the market for 6, 7, 8 years, of course, so let's put that in the PS5, so that would make sense. But then I think also they could actually have games play at upscaled 8K, as crazy as that sounds. Upscaling a game, I don't know how hard it would be to upscale a game, but it could be possible to flat out just upscale a game to 8K from 4K, and it may not even take too much processing power to do that, so that's what that could mean. But if they're talking about playing games at native full 8K, I just don't see that happening with the upcoming PS5. Now, one thing they also confirmed with the upcoming PS5 is they did confirm it's going to be backwards compatible with the PS4, but a lot of people were already expecting that in the first place. This architecture that they're using for the next PS5 apparently is going to be backwards compatible with the current PS4, and I do like that idea. I think that's very good for the consumer. That means you won't have to have your old PS4 laying around. You can have the PS5, and you can pretty much put your PS4 in the closet. I also wonder how much of the games will actually be backwards compatible, because you do have to realize with something like the Xbox One, the Xbox One is actually a console that you can't play every 360 game on. They have to roll out each game in a batch. I think because each game's not compatible correctly with the Xbox One, and they have to code each individual game, because the games aren't specifically, the hardware in the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One are so different that they have to program each individual game. But I think with the PS5, I think games should just run natively on it, and they shouldn't have to bring each game out in a patch or anything like that, and you shouldn't have to wait for your game to be on like a certain list when it comes to backwards compatibility. Every game should just work when it comes to backwards compatibility on the PS5. And now let's talk about some rumors, because there is some rumors and some things talking about the PS5, since we're already talking about the PS5. Apparently the PS5 is going to be $500. Do I believe the PS5 is going to be $500? I do believe the PS5 is going to be $500 for a couple of different reasons. You do have to realize nowadays with stuff like the PS4 Pro and now the Xbox One X being $500, I think Microsoft came out and said once they're pretty happy with the sales of the Xbox One X, so if the next generation of the PS5 comes out and it's $500 initially, I think a lot of customers won't mind that. Will a lot of gamers buy it? It will hurt gamers as a whole, and it's not the sweet spot for consoles, I will admit that overall, but I think at $500, I think a lot of people are still willing to buy your console, and I don't think you're going to have to worry all too much about people not buying your console. If it was past $500, I think that's where you really have to worry as a company, because you do remember Sony came out, I think with the PS3, they managed to announce it was going to be $600 for some wacky reason, and a lot of people did not like that. They actually had to take a loss on that by cutting it down cheaper, because nobody was having $600. I will agree, for a box that you normally just play games on, $600 is just too expensive, but $500 doesn't seem crazy at this point. It really does seem like it could actually happen with things like I said, the Xbox One X. People are just getting more used to paying $500, so why wouldn't this console come out and be $500? Would I want it to be $500? No, probably more like $400. I think $400 would be the sweet spot. Some people say $350, $300, but there's no way this console is going to come out and be $350 or $300. That's just Nintendo Switch territory, and honestly that just really doesn't make sense considering how much tech is going to be in the PS5. I think even at $500 in a lot of cases they could even take a loss on the profits. That's what a lot of companies do. If you didn't realize, they actually take a loss on their product for quite some time until parts come down and become cheaper, or who knows what the case could be. So $500 could actually mean Sony is still even taking a loss on the PS5 when the PS5 comes out, but I can see it being $500. And then the other rumor is they kind of leaked what the PS5 controller was going to be. So we have the PS4 DualShock, which a lot of people like the PS4 DualShock, and I will admit the PS4 DualShock is a very good controller. There's nothing wrong with the PS4 DualShock. Actually, looking at all of the PlayStation controllers of all time, I think the PS4 controller is definitely the sweet spot. I love it definitely over the PS3 DualShock. I think the PS2 DualShock was a very cool thing, but if they just take the PS4 DualShock and they bundle it with the PS5, I think overall I'd be really happy about that. Is Sony going to do that? Most likely Sony is not going to do that. They're probably going to make a whole new controller for the PS5, like a DualShock 5 or DualShock, whatever the next DualShock is. I don't see why they wouldn't do it, and most likely these companies like to do revisions of current hardware, so I can see that being definitely a big possibility, and most likely they are. But these rumors actually suggest that Sony is going to be putting a camera on the PS4 controller, and then on top of that they are going to be putting an LCD screen or some type of screen anyway on the next DualShock controller, kind of like the Wii U and the gamepad, how that was pretty much a controller with an LCD screen on it, or a screen on it. Now, is the PS5 controller going to be as big as the Wii U gamepad? Most likely they're not. You've seen the leaks and you've seen the rumors of that controller floating around. You can see the screen is pretty small. Do we actually need a screen on the PS4 controller? The PS5 controller? Honestly, if you ask me, I don't think we need a screen on it. We're doing just fine without it, and especially the camera. I don't think we need a camera, because usually what happens is with a lot of these controllers, some of these gimmicks just don't work, and a lot of devs don't even utilize these gimmicks. Like for instance, the PS4 controller has a touchpad on the front, but I know a lot of devs just abandoned the touchpad. Like when the system first came out, some devs were using it, but it was still hit or miss on what developer was utilizing the touchpad, and nowadays the touchpad is pretty much useless and pretty much dead, at least when it comes to core gameplay and core mechanics of games. Devs just don't use it. And then the other one that a lot of devs use hit or miss is the speaker on these controllers. The Wii, I think, really did a good job of the speaker, because I think Nintendo really wanted to utilize the speaker of the Wiimote, so that pretty much still was kind of a hit or miss, but I think they utilized it more than Sony. If you look at some of the games that use it, there's not too many games that use it, and overall it's not really necessary. So I think if Sony puts a screen and puts a camera on the upcoming DualShock controller for the PS5, I don't know how likely people are going to use that. You may use it for a while and then it may just become a fad, or not even utilized at all, so it may be a waste of time for Sony. And honestly, they shouldn't do it in the first place, because like I said, we don't need it, and on top of that it will cut into cost, and anything they can do to make this system as cheap as possible, of course, is a great thing. But who knows what the next PS5 controller is? Do I necessarily believe some of that stuff? Actually, I do believe some of that stuff could be true. They can definitely be putting a camera on the PS5 controller, and then on top of that they can also be putting a screen on the upcoming PS5 controller. I can definitely see that being a thing from Sony, because Sony likes doing these revisions to their controller, and sometimes like the touchpad was not necessary, but they went ahead and put a touchpad for whatever reason on the PS4 controller. One thing I do hope Sony flat out removes from the DualShock controller, I hope they flat out remove the light on the back, the light beam on the back, or the light bar on the back, because that's absolutely unnecessary and dumb. It actually wastes battery on the controller, and I'm actually not too happy with the PS4's current current battery when it comes to the actual controller itself, because I think the battery is quite poor. It may not seem too bad, but if you compare it to what Nintendo's doing with even their Wii U Pro controller or their newest Pro controller for the Nintendo Switch, those controllers literally get around 40 hours of battery, and that's absolutely phenomenal for a controller. Every time I use my PlayStation, I will admit, if I fully charge that thing, it seems like it dies in 1 to 2 days. It's just not a great experience. So to do what Nintendo's doing and making a flat-out battery that can last weeks on end, or at least a week or something like that, at least in my case, that would absolutely be fantastic. And yeah, I think that's all when it comes to the PS5 and everything. I might have left out some stuff here or there. I do apologize. I tried to cover as much as possible when it comes to the PS5, but honestly, I'm kind of super excited for the PS5. I can't wait to see what all the improvements are going to be to the UI, what the system's actually going to look like, what the next DualShock is going to look like, the game release for the next console. Overall, it looks like it's heating up when it comes to the PS5 and the PS5 rumors, and a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about in this video was already confirmed, and some of these were rumors and leaks, so they weren't necessarily true, but overall, I'm just super excited for the upcoming consoles, whether it be the next Xbox or the next PlayStation. Honestly, as a gamer, I'm kind of undecided which one I should go for. Should I go for the next Xbox, or should I go for the next PlayStation, because we really don't know too much information on the next Xbox. It kind of seems like we know more information on the PS5 than we do the next Xbox. I don't even think we know the name of the next Xbox. Is it going to be like the Xbox 720, the Xbox 2, or a totally different name for the Xbox brand? Because no, I don't think anybody expected this current generation Xbox to be called the Xbox One. I think a lot of people have a thought it was going to be called the Xbox 720, because 360 plus 360 is 720, of course, so that would have made sense. But overall, I'm just super excited for the next generation of consoles, and more leaks and more rumors are probably going to start rolling out. And of course, by E3 time, we could actually have information from Microsoft of the next upcoming Xbox, because at this moment, we don't know anything about the next upcoming Xbox. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News, signing out.